Welcome, 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 everybody. Come on in. Get ready for an action-packed webinar with some wonderful information pertaining to hiring and retaining restaurant workers in 2023. Better restaurant workers, I should say, too. Not these restaurant workers of the past. Better.
That is key. 2023. It's a very different year, huh? Than
it is a very different year.
It's hiring even last year. Yep.
It seems like it's been a very different year for the last 5 or 6 years, but hey, here we are. We're still alive and well. Welcome, everybody. Thank you all for joining us. We're going to give it one more minute before we make our formal introductions here. Please come on in. Just so everyone knows, if you have questions, please feel free to put those in the chat for us. You can also raise your hand and I will try and take them verbally. We are going to cover quite a few different topics today. So again, anyone with questions or comments, please put them in the chat. We're going to get our introduction started here now. My name is Zach Shifflett. I am the Director of Business Solutions at Premier Virtual. Fancy way of saying I run our sales team. I am also joined by Mr. John Garcia. John, I'll let you introduce yourself as well.
Hey everybody, I'm John Garcia. I'm the marketing director for Premier Virtual. I'll be kind of keeping an eye on the Q&A, so feel free to ask questions there as well. We'll try to address the questions live as we go through the webinar.
Awesome. Thank you so much, John. And in addition to myself and John here from Premier Virtual, we are also joined by Mr. Barry Klein. He is the VP of Customer Success with Talroo. Barry, thank you for joining us. A little bit about yourself, if you don't mind.
No, it's a pleasure. Thank you. And thank you, everyone, for being here. It's exciting to be with you all. As Zach said, my name is Barry Klein. I am Vice President of Success with Talroo. I've been with Talroo about 6.5 years and have had the privilege of looking after, at some point or another, all of our customer and partner-facing functions. Just very briefly, and the reason that I'm so happy to join you today, given the topic, is that Talroo is a talent attraction platform, and our specialty is frontline and essential workers. So restaurants, hospitality, et cetera, are really our bread and butter. So certainly we can tell you a little bit more about that as we go along, but that's our street cred to be here with you today.
Absolutely. We appreciate the street cred too. Thank you so much, Barry. We appreciate your time today. Also joining us, we have David Faro with the National Restaurant Association. Good afternoon, David. Thank you for joining us.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. My name is David Faro. I'm the Senior Manager of Workforce and Business Development for the National Restaurant Association. I'm actually at a conference right now with all of the CEOs from all of the state restaurant associations and lodging associations across the country. Many of them are excited to hear what we talked about today when this is over. But my role within the industry is to connect the workforce development system with operators across the country and to come up with multi-sector networks that help create pipelines of employees into our businesses and hotels.
Awesome. Thank you so much, David. And again, we appreciate your time as well. Okay, everyone, we're going to hop right in here. So again, if anyone has questions, please feel free to put those in the chat. John and myself will be monitoring. So these are the topics that we want to cover today in regards to hiring and retaining better restaurant workers in 2023. We want to talk about hiring trends, worker shortages. I know if you've joined us on Premier Virtual webinars in the past, you probably heard us speak about the Great Resignation and the Great Return. That's also going to play into this webinar. Leveraging tech, we're going to talk about automation and, of course, AI and the specter in everyone's room, which is ChatGPT. Long-term strategy and trends of hiring, finding candidates, growth and opportunity, cost of vacancies, and et cetera. So with that being said, we're going to hop right into our first slide here. I want to talk about really the power of technology when we talk about hiring and retaining restaurant workers. And I'll start with you, Barry. How are you seeing organizations that you work with embrace technology, maybe in a few different ways than maybe they did about 5 or 10 years ago? What's changed for you on your end that you're seeing?
Yeah. Oh, thanks for asking, Zach. It's funny, the number one on that happens to be at the top of this list here, virtual interviews. The use of technology to get more creative with attracting your talent. And virtual interviews do pop right to the fore, not just because of our partnership here with Premier Virtual, but it's real. This certainly came to prominence, the whole process of using virtual hiring events and virtual interviews during the pandemic. No one would go out in public. We couldn't go out in public. And yet, for all of you, you had to hire frontline workers who were going to be out in front of folks. So how do you mitigate the risk for the employee or the candidate in order to bring them in? Using virtual events, using social, not just social media traditionally, but using your events and getting those RSVPs for those events and using that as a jumping off point to build out your own talent community. So having a CRM-like function for your candidates, right? You don't want to nurture a candidate and then lose them. And, oh, we didn't hire them, so now they're gone. It is incumbent upon all of you to build those talent communities, find ways to stay in touch with your customers. And in fact, when we then work with customers who have done that, and we've helped drive RSVPs to an event, whether it be virtual or whether it be live, we strongly encourage them. You have to put that into your talent community. And then, oh, by the way, the next time you run an event, you can advertise that directly to them in a more personal way. You already have a way of touching them. There are innumerable ways to leverage and build on different technologies. So for instance, having your own talent community as a start, but also using your general social media to establish your brand, to reach consumers in a different way. And your consumers are probably your best source of would-be hires. And interconnecting all of those bits and pieces in terms of talent attraction has certainly been a key trend that we've been seeing really accelerate since the pandemic.
Barry, you gave us already 10 nuggets there in that opening statement that just great. I want to, with David's point of view and the restaurants, kind of looking at it from the restaurants. I know, David, you work with restaurants of all different scales and sizes, but how many are embracing tech and feel like it's helping, and how many feel like it's just another thing to do and really just not kind of getting the results that they wanted to when they signed up for that tech?
I think something that would be important to distinguish before I answered that is, what generation are we talking about? Zach mentioned in the beginning, how do we find workers that are different from workers of the past? I think that there's a lot of strength in boomers who are coming back to our industry to work. However, what I would say is, if you're integrating on the level of technology and you're trying to recruit baby boomers, who are definitely a pipeline of viable, great employees who understand the work ethic and all of that required to be in a restaurant, right? Then your technology approach is going to be different than if you're approaching a Gen Z entrepreneur who just opened up their own restaurant. So I would say that generational thing is really important. What I would say, though, is that because of the pandemic, pre-pandemic, anyone you talk to would be, we can't run a virtual world, right? Pandemic happened, we all learned our lesson, we can. And so you're at a really important time, I think, inside of the hospitality industry, where people saw a massive organizational change effort happen, and it pretty much happened overnight. And that gave people a lot of confidence that they could make technological changes along the way. Now, for those people who haven't fully gotten there yet, they still understand now that these changes do happen, will happen, and can happen at the drop of a hat. So I would say, just sort of cross-industry, well, if you went to the National Restaurant Show in Chicago recently, there's a whole convention floor dedicated to restaurant technology. So I wouldn't say the industry is afraid of it at all. But again, generational and size of business, those are going to be mitigating factors for sure.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And Barry, I want to touch on one thing that you mentioned regarding virtual interviews. You said a hot button thing for us, which is cost of vacancy. So we all know this is a competitive market, and David, I'm sure you can speak to that as well. A lot of your member organizations, once they've spent time and money nurturing that candidate, the cost of losing that candidate either to another organization or just out of the workforce in general, that is exponential. And that's something that we can't afford to lose out on, right? Once we spent that time nurturing, once we spent the money nurturing, and time is money, we want to make sure that the candidate stays within our talent pool. So those are some great points that we brought up.
Yeah,
sorry, go ahead, Barry, please.
Yeah, I was going to say what that then leads to, if not done efficiently, and it's something that as a vendor providing talent acquisition services, we have to really communicate with our customers and protect ourselves with, is the perceived cost per hire. One of the things that I embrace, knowing that it is our reality at Talroo that we are going to be held accountable to cost per hire, I don't mind saying to all of you, is I hate that. Yeah. I don't know if your hiring process is any good. I don't know if you earn dollars by bringing in candidates who you might not have ever hired anyway. I enjoy, when doing webinars, sharing some stories, anecdotes that hopefully resonate with all of you, but aren't you. Again, looking at customer success, I have more customers who I can count we will speak with and will say, hey, you talk about quality. You want to be efficient with your time. You don't want your recruiters and your managers interviewing people who you're never going to hire. So like many in our space, we have qualifying questions, 3 or 4 simple screening questions to see if this candidate can really fit the bill. Well, we don't want to use those. We don't want to use those because we want all the volume that we can. And then the next time we speak to them, they say, yeah, we're getting a lot of volume, but these candidates are terrible. Okay, do you want to start to use qualifying questions? No, we can't have that. We have to have the volume. And then you're pounding your head up against a wall because you can't have everything, right? So if quality really is the most important thing, let us help you. Let us help you drive that quality. And, you know, I don't know where that inconsistency might come from within any given organization. But these are the things that we hear all the time. You know, I must have quality, I must have efficiency, I need the lowest cost per hire I can, but get me all the candidates you can and we'll sift through them.
Yeah.
And then you take a deep breath and you say,
that's a similar challenge that we face also at Premier Virtual. You know, when we host these sorts of events on our platform, we're held liable for the quality of the candidate that's brought in during that event. Whereas we're just the platform, you know, we're just the hotel ballroom. We didn't cater the event. We didn't put the music. We didn't set this floor plan. However, it's association, right? Guilty by association. So it's very important that we're setting expectations and understanding what the people that we're working with are really after. Like you just said, it can be, I want all the candidates. I want them all to be X, Y, and Z as far as their qualifications. A lot of companies want to have their cake and eat it too. And it's our job to try and combine forces and try and make that happen for them. So David, anything that you wanted to touch on based off what Barry just said?
I actually like one of the last sentences you just said, which was combined forces. And so, you know, I have about 30 years operational experience in hospitality. And when I started to understand that the combined force third-party systems was greater than the sum of its parts, right? That's when I really started to be able to leverage relationships with people like Barry, right? I didn't have time as a manager of a restaurant working 65 to 70 hours a week to really come up with a system that was going to understand the leverage points within my overall organization, right? And secondly, I didn't have the time or understanding how to set that up. Barry does, right? There's also third parties that you can use that I'm sure Barry and I know that Premier Virtual is partnered with, where we go through those sort of qualifying questions with another organization so that it's not on Barry, so that it's not on, you know, what I use Premier Virtual for is to provide a top-notch, bespoke virtual platform for a hiring event. That's it, right? You're not responsible for quality, right? But when I bring Barry in, he's got another gear. And so there's been a lot of talk since the pandemic about multi-sector networks within the public domain. Business needs to start thinking that way too. You have a specialty, Barry has a specialty. Think of gears, think of a community, think of combining forces in your words. And that diversity of interest, I've found personally, takes the pressure off people like Barry, because they're like, where are the muffins to Barry? And Barry's like, well, you know, that wasn't on the list, man, right? And so I'll sum it up by saying to anybody who's a hiring manager, who's an assistant manager, you got to think in systems, right? So Google systems thinking and start putting your gears together that way. And if you've got one person in the group who has all the answers, relegate that person to the right side of the system, right? That would be my response to what Barry just shared, which was so accurate, so accurate.
Good stuff. Let me just then throw this back at you. So what side of the fence? I know the answer to this, but do you want more candidates or do you want more quality candidates? Like, would you rather have 100 people attend your interview or 10 that are actually qualified?
Well, we want quality candidates, right? We want people who have maybe gone, so I won't name names just so that I don't put anybody under the hot seat. And this isn't a hot seat, they're compliments. But let's say that you have a community college, right, that has used a third-party assessment program that is using the latest data to determine. Now, I'll use Canada as an example. There was a project that happened there. They were pointed at engineers. So they had a sample size of 15,000 people. They got their 1,200 engineers who they put into their program. They worked. But what about all the other people who weren't engineers? We got 880 people from that list who were lockstep perfect for hospitality, right? But we had to expand our system to work with third party. If you talk to Barry, I mean, you're so right. If there's mist on a mirror right now and we can prove they're breathing, we're interested in at least talking to them, right? But as employers, as employers, it's our job to illuminate career pathways to those people who look our direction. Right? If I become a dishwasher, which is a great first job in America, I also want to know that I can be a regional manager in 4 years if I want to be. And I also want to know how to get there, right? So that's a quality employee. Whether he has experience or she has experience washing dishes, the restaurant industry is good at teaching people how to do the jobs we need them to do. But a quality candidate means that we have provided access to all of those things for them as employers.
Absolutely, absolutely. And another thing I wanted to touch on too, you mentioned getting the systems to work together, David. It's just like a restaurant, right? The front of the house can't operate without the back of the house. It all needs to happen in conjunction with one another, or else there's going to be a failure. The food's going to come out cold, or the food might not come out at all, or the dishes aren't getting washed. If you're not working lockstep with other organizations to try and improve the product that you're offering to organizations, you will fall behind. So some great points there. What I want to jump into now, gentlemen, are candidate-focused hiring. So biggest challenges, what we just spoke about, the lack of quality candidates. What we want to do is really talk about flexibility and how that really affects the quality of candidates that we're going to bring into our pipeline. So David, I'll start with you. What have you seen that organizations that you work with, their job offerings are a little bit different now that we've reached a virtual space than maybe it was about 5 years ago? What has changed as far as the offerings of flexibility for the workforce?
Certainly scheduling is all, sorry?
I'm sorry, I was gonna say this could kind of just fit into the hiring process. How much of this is part of that interview, or just letting the candidate know what this flexibility is about?
Yeah, so again, I would say it starts with that job description and understanding who you're targeting. I have absolutely categorically different job descriptions for Gen X than I have for Gen Z. They want different things. Now, Gen Z wants flexibility. What does that mean? A lot of times people think it means hours. That is not what the data tells us at all. A lot of times, I'll give you an example. Barry, you used this story before. There's a company right now that's using, and I forget the exact term, but it's earned wages on demand, meaning 50% of their wages, they can get deposited into an account at the end of their workday, right? So that's wage flexibility. They're not getting paid anymore, but the accounting system is set up for this company, right? Now, what they thought is that it would appeal to entry line level workers like David when he was washing dishes and I needed that $50 that night that I had earned that day. But it has a lot of ramifications for the employers, right? One, we're finding it's appealing to people right up to white collar, nurses, et cetera, right? So without going on and on about the benefits of that, it was done as a pilot for 3 months. They cut the pilot short at a month and said, we're implementing it company-wide. Right? Now that's innovative and brave, but the results were there right away because they increased their sense of what does flexibility mean, right? I think we're working in an age now too where there's a lot of debate about what, remote flexibility and what are the pros and cons of that. But I do know this, if you are appealing to a millennial or a Gen, and I'm saying this based on data, and Gen X loves data. If you're appealing to millennial or Gen Z, and flexibility isn't the top thing that you're talking about, right, in terms of your job offering, you'll be relegated to the second pile for that group for both of those generations, who are the majority of the workforce right now.
Awesome.
Absolutely. And I can speak to that myself personally. When I was looking for a job when Premier Virtual scooped me up, one of the reasons I chose Premier Virtual was because of the flexibility offered. So I am a case in point. While we're not a hospitality company, I think that flexibility as far as offerings, it really goes a long way across industry. And like you just mentioned, David, it's not necessarily about working a certain amount of hours. That's not the flexibility that we're talking about. It's remote versus a hybrid schedule. It's like you just said with the adjusted wages and how they're getting paid. Are you giving them the ability to kind of have that good work-life balance that can create and foster an environment of growth and giving them opportunities to grow within, right? If they do start as that dishwasher, are they going to have the opportunity with time and hard work and effort to become that regional manager 5 years, 10 years down the road? So that's an important part that also takes into account flexibility. Barry, was there anything that you'd like to add based off those?
Let me just say, because that is very innovative, Barry. I mean, it's not tech, right? We think of innovation as tech. This is innovative, in a very different way. Are you seeing other things like that, Barry, with your clients?
Yeah, in fact, it's I loved everything you guys all just said. And David's point about the pay on demand, it caused me to think about something that I didn't anticipate mentioning. for all of you listening to us today, you're not just competing with each other. You are competing with a robust gig economy. And gig companies who let you get paid when you clock out, that is a huge selling point for the workforce today. And that's who you're being compared against. And it does go back to putting yourself in the shoes of your would-be candidate. So if you are looking for some folks who, as David alluded to earlier, might be a little further down their life journey, you have to think like them. How do you reach them? Walk in their shoes. But especially for the folks we're speaking to today, knowing that your richest source of candidates are on the younger side, again, walk in their shoes. They are looking for flexibility. They are looking for speed. They are looking for speed in all things. I want to get paid on the spot. And that brings me back to the hiring process itself. When I think about speed and time, the number of customers who we talk to, who, again, I laugh at the idea of guilt by association. We will be told, your candidates are ghosting us. And my first question is, well, what about the candidates you're getting from our competitors? Oh yeah, they're ghosting us too. Okay, so first of all, don't blame us. But then let's talk about your hiring process. How quickly do you get back to people? 48 hours. Nope, wrong answer. Same day. We will tell our customers, when you get a job lead from us, I want you to call them within 3 to 5 minutes. And they look at us like we're crazy. Speed, time to action is huge. If you take 2 days to call them and then have a delay before you interview, and then have a delay before you make the offer, and then have a delay until they can start, let's say that's 2 weeks. I guarantee you there is a competitor who is either a similar restaurant in your niche, or a gig company, or someone who has screened them, interviewed them, hired them, and let them start within 48 hours.
I love this, and I hear this a lot, Barry, but what about HR? What about background checks? Things that companies need to do that, has been in place for generations, and right, and they just won't move from that model. How do you change it? I mean, it sounds great. You're right, 100%, because that's way too long. But how do you change it? And maybe an example of someone who has, and how that is working.
Yeah, it's a great point. Certainly one of the things we see from a trend is, and this may resonate with some of you in the audience, a rebellion among folks who are running quick serve restaurants that are franchises. The mothership wants to do all of this, and we see absolute rebellion out in the field. The individual storefront owners will say, we're doing it ourselves. And they will go rogue and it works for them. For those who play a little bit more by the rules, like many things within a corporate environment, getting the executive buy-in to get alignment so that things can start to happen in parallel. You can't do one thing at a time. And if you can get things going in parallel, and also, especially for the smaller storefronts out there who we're speaking with, I can't emphasize enough having a champion, a manager, someone you trust to oversee your recruiting efforts, who may not be a trained HR recruitment professional, but who gets excited about this and will stay with it, and who will learn a little bit about talent acquisition and can help shepherd things through and really be a long-term champion. And candidly, I don't want it to be the owner. I don't want it to be the general manager. There's too many other things to do. But the number of, especially restaurants and other hospitality customers who we have, where we get thrown off the rails, which of course isn't good for our business, but really they're getting thrown off the rails because the person quit. The part-time person who was not integral to the management team, who was kind of looking after talent acquisition as a hobby, if you will, they left. You all know you have high turnover roles. If you give that role to someone who is high turnover, all that knowledge is going to walk out with them. And then you're starting from scratch. Then your hiring efforts suffer. You start to fall behind. Of course, it's not good for us. We would like you to keep working with us. Having that mindset of how critical this entire topic that we're talking about today is for you, and aligning both your local management and your executive management, depending on your corporate structure, it's hard to overemphasize how important that can be.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great points there. Very great points. And that can also speak to a topic that we want to get into a little further down the road. You know, how does automation help with that candidate focused hiring process? And we're going to get into that here shortly. But next thing we want to speak about, John, is there anything that you wanted to add on those points?
No, but I did want to hear from David on that. I mean, I love how David keeps putting it into context of the generation that you're speaking to. Would it be the same as far as you're hiring a Gen Z or a millennial, best practices to get them through that hiring process quickly and get them onboarded and get them working? Things that you've seen, David, that work as far as that.
Yeah, so while I'll use an example of my Gen Z son who was ticked off the other day that he couldn't do his interview on Zoom because my two kids have grown up and everything can happen on Zoom and the stigma does not exist that it did for us. Look at us, we're here on Zoom now, different areas of the country. This is the way it goes now. And it is only going to go more in that direction as we become more linked that way. So my answer to your question, John, and thanks for asking, would be my son also expects the straightest technological line from A to B. So was just talking with a Gen Z colleague of mine who wanted to order coffee at the hotel we're at. They have an app that you can order coffee. She got 3 steps into it. It was a little bit of a hassle, couldn't pick her size. Abort, right? So when we think about, for those of us who've been in communications and marketing and we're sort of born and raised on that funnel, marketing funnel, right? You really have to, and generationally, there's a different funnel in terms of content, but what's going to kick your person out? Gen Z, if they got to hit 3 different buttons that say submit and it doesn't work once, they're out. They're out, right? We always talk about Gen Z as being technologically savvy. No, they don't know how their phone works. They just know it better work. And if it doesn't work, right? So that hiring process is the same thing. If it's difficult to get on, to get connected, but if boom, like Premier Virtual does very well, right? If they're on, if I'm trying to apply at Barry's business, right? I'm immediately connected to Barry. Barry has, that system has to be simple, simple, simple for Gen Z. But if you're talking a boomer, right? There's all kinds of suspicion that go, they're not sure they're going to get it right. And so, yeah, I think as you're talking about technology, I'm making a big assumption here, but the people on this phone call are older than Google. So we get how to work in that area, in that analog area, right? But my kids have no memory of a life where you didn't pay with your phone, right? So if I give them a $20 bill for their tooth, they don't know what to do with it, right? It'd be better if I slipped a little, Amazon card under there or something. So the point is, yes, it's extremely generational. And what I would suggest to the people watching is to Google what attracts Gen Z to the job, what attracts millennials, what attracts, and look at that, and then look at your job descriptions and your systems that bring people in, right? And say, does it match up with the generation that I'm looking to hire? And I would add one last thing based on what Barry said too, which is important. If you were to hire entry-level Gen Z right now through any sort of digital format, right? I've got to have some sort of AI set up that's going to hit them at least 4 more times between when I've hired them and when they're going to say, hey, you're coming on Thursday. I'm not doing it. Melva, my assistant, is doing it. But if you don't do that, you're going to be ghosted probably in the 70% range right now. But if they're like, David cares about me, hey, just really excited to have you come, get that all loaded in, get that going, especially on the entry-level line, right? And make sure that technology is working so that you're not emailing Melva that you're happy that Bobby's coming to work. Did that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And we wanted to talk a little bit about strategies, not only to attract people, but you did all the work to attract them and then you lose them in those 4 days between them, signing and signing up. So these are engagement, this is like an engagement tool, right? I mean, I would say probably even text messaging could be a good platform for you to have, right? Have you seen that at all, Barry? Is that something that you guys work with? Or
absolutely, and everything David said just so resonates with me. And we did not rehearse this beforehand, I might say.
But we went to the same hairdresser.
Yeah, well, so. Listen, I tell David, this just doesn't happen, right? This just doesn't happen.
A lot of work.
That's you got a good looking panel here today. Yeah, so much of that resonates. To start with the idea of nurturing relationships, whether that relationship is with a new employee, as David said, in that delay before they start, you either need to give them the personal touch, or using AI, the illusion of the personal touch, right? And that's okay these days. When we talk about driving job seekers to jobs, one of our solutions today uses text messaging to encourage people to complete the long form application. And I'll get back to applications in a minute. Some industries need a long form, but we can capture a short form, but then we are nurturing them with text messaging to remind them to finish the long form. It's important for their industry. And what we're seeing is remarkable success, because these are people who understand their industry, if it might be in trucking or others where these long forms are so important. But by nurturing that candidate, when they get home at the end of the day, or they have a chance to be on their laptop rather than on their cell phone, they're happy to then take the time, again, for the right generation, to finish a long form app. When we work with customers and we do RSVPs for, say, a virtual event, Talroo is able to automate reminders to that candidate. Thank you for registering. A few days later, there's a reminder. The day of, we send the link again to the virtual meeting, or if it's an in-person event, the directions to get there, things like that. But there is still no substitute for the personal touch. Our customers who do events, and whether it's one person or a team of people, calling the folks who have RSVP'd, emailing the folks who have RSVP'd, they're bright enough to know the difference between the automated reminders that we send and the truly personal touch provided by a human being. The show rate to your event will be dramatically higher if you've, to use, David just said it, make them know you care about them. The impact is dramatic to have that personal touch. Yeah, David also in his comments caused me to, if I may pivot to a slightly different comment, that I cringe when I think about application processes. Dear God, please don't make people register for your site before they can send in an application. You want to bounce millennials and Gen Zs. You want me to create a password with you? I don't even know who you are. Bounce. Yeah. I'll go somewhere else. And it also brings up, we talk about competition. They are one click away from a search engine results page with all of your competitors. Who's the most convenient to do business with? Who's the most convenient to apply with? Who brings convenience? Now I read your job description. Who has flexibility? Who's making the right degree of pay? Your competitor is an inch away from you on the computer or on the mobile screen. And don't think for a moment that they're going to think, oh, I want to work for you so badly that I'm willing to register and do a 15-minute application and do a personality assessment. They're not, because there's no reason for them to do so. The next would-be employer is just a click away.
Awesome. A lot of the stuff that you spoke about, Barry, with tech, David and I were having a conversation a couple of weeks ago about being virtual ready, right, David? David, you have a large organization of restaurants. In the sense of how many, when we're having this conversation, you feel our tech, are virtual ready, are embracing these tools and are having virtual interviews and are having virtual events and, are using text messaging and adapting really these tools that are meant to make life easier and hire better in that virtual ready spectrum. How's that landscape from where you're sitting?
Again, I think depending on, like Barry had said earlier, corporate structure dictates a lot of that in terms of resources to do that. I think what we're in a liminal place right now. So my first answer is all, because America has cell phones, America is Zooming, so they're doing it in their own lives. So they understand that it can be done. They have a clear vision of it. They get that. But then the next question would be, how do I take what I know how to do just for myself, right? And come up with a system that's going to allow me to do it for my business, right? Which is just a little bit bigger system. And so, for instance, and Barry, I mean, you're preaching to the choir on that one. It's not just Gen Z and millennials. If you ask me for I've done it too many times now, right? If you want my attention in an information economy, you got to open the door right up, right away, right? And so, virtual ready, which that was such a fun conversation, John, because I really think that's a great, I would ask, rather than ask me that, I would ask the people who are watching, just to do a self-assessment. Are you virtual ready? Because right now there are workforce development professionals across the country who are setting up infrastructures to create with Premier Virtual, right? To create virtual hiring events. Could you participate tomorrow? If you couldn't participate, I'm talking to the audience, if you could not participate tomorrow, the barrier to entry is really small, right? You've got a great team at Premier that helps you do that. And just like Barry said, if you are not, and let's coin the term, John, virtual ready, right? As an employer, you've got some work to do. You've got some work to do because you're not part of the 21st century anymore if you're not.
Yeah, and I love how Barry said, you're competing against the gig economy. I mean, we got to think you're not just competing against other restaurants, and so that virtual ready is going to get you into a more competitive space, obviously, to do all this stuff. Zach, you want to tee up the next one?
Yeah. I wanted to speak about, and we touched on this briefly a few times regarding automation in our hiring processes, but, can technology fill the void of these missing workers and getting more people into our pipelines? And kind of the effect of, the buzzword of 2023, or the buzz phrase, I should say, which is artificial intelligence, chat GPT, and that's effect on the current hiring in the restaurant industry. So, Dave, I want to start with you. Regarding automation in the organizations that you work with, are you seeing a loss of fidelity or quality of candidates when you're automating more tasks? Are you seeing higher quality candidates when you're having your hands on through every step of the process? Or are we seeing automation kind of more able to mimic a human interaction and kind of really take that candidate from the next step in their interview process?
So a couple things. One, I would say, I can't claim to be a bona fide expert on that or have brought data.
Oh, do we lose him?
Yeah, I think David froze.
I think we lost David. I'm sorry about that, folks.
I'll message him. We could go on to if Barry wants to kind of chime in there.
Yeah, Barry, same question over to you as far as automation, AI, and its effect on retaining and hiring better restaurant workers in 2023.
Yeah, certainly starting from the hiring side, we're seeing enormous acceleration of AI-powered interview chatbots, which are exploding onto the scene to make the interview process much more efficient. Of course, that cost becomes an issue for in that world, but like anything, it will become less expensive. It'll become more prevalent, and the ability of a bot to well replicate the kinds of Q&A that you would have, especially initially with a candidate, it's there. I was at a conference 8 years ago where Amazon was talking about the non-touch hire. They wanted everything to happen through the computer. Well, that was Amazon 8 years ago. Those tools are becoming ever more prevalent for folks to use. So certainly that is a big move. The other thing that really comes to mind, and Talroo is building a new product that I look forward to rolling out with all of you perhaps later in the year. But part of what it was predicated on is, to say it plainly, most of you would probably acknowledge this and agree, but I'll say it plainly. Our job descriptions stink. People don't know how to write job descriptions, and that's not an insult. How often do you write them? And so we've actually, in the product that we're looking at rolling out, we were already well on our way because we have so much data about what makes an effective job description, but we've integrated with ChatGPT, which helps make that more effective. But if you accept as a premise that you're probably not as good at writing job descriptions as you think you are, and I don't say that with any insult because I think everyone stinks at it, use ChatGPT, use AI. And then the beauty of it is you can create an initial draft and then, of course, add your own intelligence to it or change the prompt and get it more and more specific to what you need. Let the computer do the work in that regard, because it probably will do a more than adequate job. And what's really interesting that I hadn't thought about until David mentioned it earlier, if you're using AI to build that job description, now change the prompt. Now make this job description appropriate for an individual over 40 years old.
Yeah, that's good.
That would be huge. And then figure out where you're going to run those. You may not use them all. One might go to Talroo, one might go to Indeed, one might be a radio advertisement, one might be a billboard in your community. And finding that messaging that resonates, AI can help you do that. And then you can A/B test, you can figure out what makes the most sense for you. So that was just one example. And David, I'm glad you're back unfrozen. I'll kick it back to you.
Apparently where I'm at has a limit on the, they cut you off. Anyway, it doesn't matter. I wanted to jump on, but thank you. I was very happy I was able to get back on quickly. I wanted to jump on what you're saying. One, even if you've had it, craft a job description for a Gen Z person, and then you get that one that you like, then ask ChatGPT, what would be the best placement schedule for this? What are the best social, I truly think when it comes to AI, and by AI right now, I'm really specifically referring to ChatGPT, I haven't met many people who have gotten to the top of their level of amazement, right? They haven't figured out the questions that they can ask it, right? And they continually to be amazed. So I would say, just to sort of put a cherry on top of that, I actually stopped work last week and I went downstairs to my boys and I said, turn off your screen. And I said, I want you to remember the day I said this to you. The most important thing you can do in your education right now is to understand how to harness and ride artificial intelligence. Don't let anybody tell you any different, right? Some of us older people have ethical concerns about that's not even an issue. Learn how to use it, learn how to automate. It is how the future is. It's not how the future is going to be run, it's how it's being run.
I had the same conversation with my son who's 19 and a freshman in university. So yeah, absolutely. I mean, nothing like we've seen ever in our generation, and how quickly it's just taking, anything. We're doing AI for even images, right? And now you're seeing it for video and for audio. I mean, there's really, pretty much any application for it. So yeah, that's, get on board or get out of the way, right?
Yeah, and I can speak to that too, because I'm right there on the cutoff of, I was born in 1984. So I grew up, I remember the time where the porch light coming on meant it was time for me to come home. But I also remember the first sounds of my dial-up modem connecting to America Online. And now I'm into the ChatGPT section where I have a digital friend that can answer every single question under the sun for me. And also keep in mind too, just something that you can use as a helpful tip. Most people don't know this, or maybe they do and they don't utilize. You can use ChatGPT the same way that you would use Google. So if you want to Google something, you can put it in ChatGPT and it will give you smart results. And oftentimes it's going to be, I don't want to say better than Google, but it will be different and it will bring other things to light for you. So I appreciate everyone touching on that point. And that also talks about how we're hiring more efficiently by leveraging technology. And also, just so everyone knows too, with Premier Virtual, all the things that we're talking about as far as being able to conduct virtual interviews, as far as being able to be virtual ready, being trained through our platform. That's all a part of the services that we offer. So I'd be remiss if I didn't mention Premier Virtual and how we kind of fit in with the synergy as far as the topics that we're structuring here and that we're speaking about right now. What I want to get into now is sort of the long-term trends. So we're talking about how things are moving so quickly over the past 2 to 5 years. A lot of changes. Where do we see hiring and retention in restaurants going in the next 2 years, 5 years, 10 years? What are we going to see that's going to be different, outside of the box thinking, maybe something that we can't even quite anticipate quite yet? And David, I'm going to start with you on that.
So my focus within the industry is on creating meaningful relationships between workforce development systems, workforce development councils, and the industry. And so I think one trend that you're going to see, because of the pandemic, the workforce development system said, oh, hospitality, we would like to focus on that. So there are many more workforce development systems post-pandemic that have declared hospitality as a sector of focus. So just reaching out to your local workforce development council, asking them if hospitality is a focus, and if they say no, ask them why not, right? Now, once you've gotten to that point, their job is to take Americans, to train them for a specific industry, and to help locate a place for them in that industry where they can find success. So that's one trend that is building every single day, integration with workforce development. Barry, what would you say is another trend you're seeing?
Yeah, thank you, David. My mind goes to a counter trend, if you will. And David, I'm especially interested in your response to this observation. Not to contradict everything we just said about AI, because I couldn't agree more. But, everyone's talking about their job and their role. And let's face it, that which can be automated away probably should be automated away. And if your value to an employer is on something that a machine can do better, you'd better upskill, and that business better look at its business through a fresh lens. So I think, for instance, about all the excitement from a few years ago, where the first automated vehicles were going to be trucks. You know, they're on long haul. They're going to drive Route 80 from New York to San Francisco. A computer can do that. Yeah, but then it has to take the off ramp. And they're not very good at that right now. And so all the excitement and all the hullabaloo got diluted through the fact of what reality really is. And when I think about restaurants, quick serve restaurants, my experience with my daughter when she was 3 years old, find me the robot or AI programmed kiosk that can handle the mother of a 3-year-old who is having a bad experience, and God forbid that kid doesn't get everything they want from that restaurant. Find me the computer that can do that. You know, the ability to add value to a business by up-leveling service skills, communication. To me, that's a real opportunity. And I think that is also going to be appealing to a generation that realizes, oh my goodness, I'd like to get a job and I'm about to be automated away. People hopefully will still be better at certain things than the AI ever would. At least in our lifetimes, until Skynet takes over.
Yeah.
Barry, I want to underline that just because we're talking about trends. Right now, as I'm dealing with isn't the right term, as I'm partnering with organizations across the country, one of the #1 skill sets that's required when I'm working with a group and saying, what kind of upskilling can we bring into the industry that is going to lift all boats, right? It's customer service training, right? We come in, we do a 1-day, a 2-day, a 3-day, and we get them to that point where, and any of the people watching know this, even when we go to our fine dining establishments, service has changed in the United States post-pandemic because of the lack of people filling the jobs. So when we're taking people into these jobs, right, which we want them there, sometimes they're not coming with the same sort of generational ideas about customer service, again, to go back to that maybe some of us older and more genteel people have, right? And so a real trend in hiring right now, Zach, is to get that customer service training up front. And an exciting thing about that is when the restaurant association, when the hotel and lodging association holds customer service training in any region of the country, I get calls from a construction business saying, hey, we've got a front desk person we'd like to send through. I get it from insurance adjusters. And the reason I bring that up, I can name a bunch of different out-of-industry people who want their people to go through a hospitality customer service program.
Absolutely.
And the reason they want to do that is because, well, I'll just say it's a transferable skill, right? Our people who I learned hospitality at tableside. Oh, that doesn't work. Oh, this works, so on and so forth. But that's a skill that I frankly think I'm my #1 skill in my profession today still. Is the level of customer service that I can bring to people. And so I would say, though, that would be the second trend that I would really say people are focusing on across all industry. And if you can build that into your hiring event, hey, we're going to do customer service up front, and then we're going to bring these candidates through Premier to your industry, I think you'll get a lot of industry attention for that.
I always say my first job was a busser at one of the biggest restaurants in New York City, had 10 dining rooms. And I always say, outside of probably nursing and teaching, it's probably the toughest job in the world, and they are transferable skills because you better learn, how to treat people, how to control your emotions and all of that. But, I wanted to kind of just segue this into data, because how do restaurants know if they are doing a good job or not? We talked about some tools about hiring and retention, but how about how do they know what's working and not working? Barry, you spoke a little bit about data before we started the call. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, John. It turns a little bit into a Talroo commercial, but I'll use this as an example for what you should ask of your vendors. So when you look at some of the features and benefits that Talroo brings, we are highly data focused. And we are able to use the data that we collect from billions of job searches a month to help, for instance, with job title expansion. Mm-hmm. And, we talk about job descriptions. I'd also encourage you to look at your job titles. Do they speak the way a human being speaks, the way your candidate would speak? We often have hospitality customers who we have to convince not to advertise their job as front desk concierge. Can you just call it customer service? Because that's what someone's going to search on. Mm-hmm. And so if you insist on having the concierge title, we're going to suggest to you through our machine learning other options that you might want to test. And with various other things that we can do, now we can do some A/B testing. Now we can look at the reach of the job. We can look at the application rate. We can hopefully work with you to determine the hire rate. And so does it take a little bit of effort and tweaking? Yeah, it does. But the data can inform the right way to approach things rather than what has so often happened within talent acquisition in general, which is by gut feel, right? Or even worse, perhaps from the point of view of the employer, rather than from the point of view of the candidate and the employee, who, I think a theme that's running through everything we're saying here is the candidates are in charge. They are in charge these days. So recognizing what will resonate with them, which titles work, even when going back to titles, not just the words of the title itself, but we can experiment with our customers to augment those titles. Customer service dash signing bonus available, customer service dash paid time off, right? What do we want to bring up to the fore? What that we want right in front of the job seeker to have them give that job opportunity a chance.
And then obviously you'll be able to see what is getting the results, and you'll be able to kind of pivot or move things in those directions. That's great advice. David?
A couple things that I would say. One is anytime that we do bring meaningful data to people, the phrase I always hear is, well, I'll be darned, right? And so that gut feeling that people have about data, in my experience, they're not always completely off, but they're generally a skew of what the data really tells us. In the hospitality industry, it is very difficult to find data that's meaningful, right? And that's accurate at the same time because of the amount of different state regulations, because of the different pay scales and all of that. And so in hospitality, we depend on certain data platforms, but I would ask the operators who are watching right now, because we've been told data, 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 data. That's how you answer all your questions. Well, you may not be a data scientist. It may not mean anything to you. So I would ask yourself the question first, twofold. What is a data point that would be meaningful into my restaurant? And have 3 of them. And then ask yourself, do you have any leverage whatsoever on that data point? And if the answer to both questions is yes, then start writing it down every single day, whether you know how to use it or not, right? Yeah. And that leverage will start to materialize. I think people get caught in a blizzard of data sometimes, especially when data scientists come in and say, we can show you all of this. Pick 3 or 4 that are meaningful, start working on those. And then once you know how to ride that horse, you can start to come up with more complicated systems where you understand the relationship between data and leverage and whether you have it or not.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for that, gentlemen. We had a couple questions come in, and I'll handle the first one. What is the average yearly employee turnover in the hospitality industry? As per Google, it is at 75%. And I actually thought that would be a low number for hospitality. I'm sure, as everyone who on this call knows, hospitality has one of the highest churn rates of any different industry. So that's why it's really important to understand the trends of what's happening now and what's going to be happening next year, next decade, how to make sure your organization is set up for success, making sure you're agile, you're on the forefront of the different trends that you can employ for your business. And then the second question here, cost to hire, and I'll toss this out to the group. My understanding would be that it's going to depend. Obviously, the cost to hire for your busboy or bus girl is going to be different than the cost to hire for your regional manager of a franchise group. So that's going to be kind of dependent on the position, correct?
Yeah, if I may, I'll kick that off. The Talroo has actually worked on a study with the Brandon Hall Group to try to define the cost of frontline workers and again, very, very rough numbers, but for an organization with more than 1,000 employees, the average cost per hire, again, for frontline, not the manager role, as we were just discussing, frontline is $340. For small businesses with fewer than 1,000 employees, it's basically 2x that, $670, just shy of 2x. So you're dealing with that range of $300, call it $300 to $600 for a frontline worker, very dependent, obviously, on your geography and the talent pool and things like that. When you get into management layers, I'm probably going to double it again, right? You're going to end up in the thousands of cost per hire for a management role. But yeah, we do see consistency across that frontline worker when your restaurant is competing with the local Amazon warehouse and you're competing with, gig thing, and you're looking at that frontline worker who is can probably do any of those jobs and do them well, and is appropriate for all of them, that $300 to $400 range.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that, Barry. We appreciate it. Okay, everyone, we are running up against our 4 p.m. Eastern Standard cutoff time. I wanted to open it up for any questions or comments from the group, and also give the opportunity for both Barry and David for you each to leave final remarks. So David, I'll start with you. Any final remarks you want to leave us with?
Yeah, I would say to operators, the number one hiring technique that I had when I ran operations was to run a great place to work, right? And then people will find you, word goes out. If you're a great place to work, by your definition, not by my definition, by your definition, if you're a great place to work, things will start to happen. I would also add too, that right now we find with Gen Z in particular, that having an understanding that there's going to be professional development put into their position, even if they're starting at an entry level, this is huge, right? So if I know that I'm being hired at Barry's House of Pancakes, but at the same time, he's going to get me some industry recognized credentials, right? I'll get Serve Safe Manager, I'll get Serve Success Certified Restaurant Professional, Guest Service Gold, whatever it is. I know that that would have appealed to me 20 years ago, right? So that would be my thing, is look at the professional development of your people from job description right up to when they're a regional manager, sharing in your success.
That's great.
Thank you so much, David.
Yeah,
Barry, toss it over to you. Any final remarks?
Yeah, sort of building on David's thoughts, you know, the number one thing that I try to instill in my team and really anyone at Talroo is be a job seeker. And for all of you who are hiring, be a job seeker, both in terms of walking in the shoes of your would-be candidate, but I mean physically be a job seeker. Spend a little time at night, browse for jobs, search for them. Go on to Google, which is where most people start their job search. Type in server for your community. Not, will you see your ad? Will you see your competitors? Is your pay rate competitive? Does your job ad look right? Is it well laid out with lots of white space? And is it friendly? Is it inviting? Go through the application process of your application process. Go through your competitor's application process and start to understand things from the point of view of the candidate. There is absolutely no substitute for understanding the point of view of the candidate.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more.
Yeah, I just want to
go ahead, please.
Yeah. So David, you know, great place to work, obviously, you know, underline that. Industry credentials, I love that. You know, a restaurant doesn't just have to be a starting job and just kind of a throwaway job, right? It can really be a great career. Management needs to paint that picture for you. I love that, Barry, be a job seeker, right? You know, put yourself in the shoes of the other person. And obviously a lot of this revolved around embracing tech. And we want to just make sure everyone on the call knows that we're going to give you an opportunity to embrace tech. Everyone on the call has can use Premier Virtual for a 30-day trial. So we can help you just kind of, you know, really get going with this. Like we talked a little bit earlier about being just virtual ready. It won't really cost you anything to try, you know, put this together so that you can do a virtual event, see what virtual interviewing is about. If you have multiple locations, this is just even more value, right? This lets you do a lot more at one time. So we just wanted to reiterate that and thank everybody for being here. Zach, you'll be following me up if you want to just close it out.
Yeah, that was it, John. We really appreciate everyone's time today. Barry, David, thank you both so much. You guys added a lot of value, gave us a lot of different information, and we really appreciate that. And like John just mentioned, if anyone's interested, we are offering you 30 days free on Premier Virtual platform. You can come find out what Premier Virtual is all about. Why we are the chosen partner in workforce across private and public sectors. And of course, I'm sure that David and Barry would be more than happy to take your inquiries too. David, again, is with the National Restaurant Association, and Mr. Barry Klein is with Talroo. So thank you again, gentlemen. We appreciate your time today, and thank you to all of our attendees. If there are any questions, please reach out to us via email, and everyone have a great rest of your day.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you, everyone.